Welcome to a deep dive into Epicureanism. We're going to be exploring some fascinating ideas from all this research you've given me.
A philosophy from ancient Greece that's still relevant today. It's incredible.
Yeah, I know, right? So, what exactly is Epicureanism? Before all this, I kind of pictured like lavish feasts and parties.
Yes, the eat, drink, and be merry image.
Exactly. But that's not really it, is it?
Not quite. Epicureanism is about happiness, but they define happiness in a way that might surprise you.
Okay, I'm listening. Lay it on me.
It's called ataraxia, which means tranquility, and aponia, the absence of pain, both physical and mental.
So less about like intense pleasure and more about just like being content.
Exactly. A sense of calm, being free from all the disturbances.
Huh. Almost counterintuitive to how we think today.
It is. Epicurus, the guy who started all this, he went as far as to say pleasure is the absence of pain.
Wow. Makes you rethink things, doesn't it? How we think about pleasure, what really satisfies us long term.
It really does.
So how did they actually try to achieve this tranquility? Our research says their view of the world, particularly atoms, was super important.
You're spot on. Epicurus got this idea from Democritus, that everything, even our souls, are made up of these tiny particles, atoms.
Everything is atoms, okay. But how does that connect to happiness?
Well, it changes everything. Like their view of the gods, for example.
There's a but coming, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. They believed in gods, but
This is where it gets interesting.
they believed that the gods don't care about us at all. They're just there, no judgment, no intervening in our lives.
Wow. Talk about radical, especially back then. Most religions were all about appeasing the gods, fearing punishment.
Right. And for the Epicureans, this removed a huge source of anxiety. No fear of divine retribution, no need for crazy rituals or anything.
That's pretty liberating, isn't it?
It is. Liberating is a great word for it. But what about the fear of death?
Ah, yeah, that's a big one. Did they have a solution for that too?
They weren't afraid of death either. Remember, everything is atoms, even us. So death, it's just those atoms dispersing.
So no pain, no consciousness, like lights out.
Pretty much. No problem.
It really changes how you think about dying, doesn't it? Like not an ending,
Yeah,
just part of the process.
it does. It's about accepting death.
Okay, so no fear of gods, no fear of death.
Mhm.
Sounds pretty good so far, but there's more to it, right? It wasn't just this atoms worldview.
You're right. Epicurus, he actually gave some practical guidelines.
Like an ancient self-help book. I'm intrigued.
Exactly. It's called the Tetrapharmakos, the 4-part cure.
4 steps to happiness. Tell me more.
Well, it's about tackling our biggest fears head on. First, like we said, no fear of the gods because they're indifferent to us.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second, no fear of death because it's just the natural end.
Again, makes sense with the whole atoms thing. What about the other 2 parts of this cure?
Third one is about the fear of pain. They weren't masochists or anything. They were all about pursuing pleasure, but in a balanced way.
So being aware that some pleasures might actually lead to more pain down the road.
Exactly. Choosing those simple pleasures that don't have nasty side effects. And learning to deal with unavoidable pain when you have to.
Very relevant today, wouldn't you say? We're constantly bombarded with messages of want more, buy more.
Oh, absolutely. That's a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth part, it addresses the fear of not getting what we want. Epicureans believed in moderating your desires, appreciating what you have.
Wow, that's powerful. So much of our anxiety comes from wanting what we don't have.
It really does. This Tetrapharmakos, it's about simplicity, being present, finding joy in the little things.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here, inner peace, managing your desires, finding joy in the now.
Mm-hmm.
But how did this compare to other philosophies at the time, like Stoicism? They both came from ancient Greece, but they seem so different.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's like a tale of 2 philosophies.
I like that.
Born in the same world, but with radically different approaches.
Our sources have this table contrasting them. It says the ultimate goal for Epicureans was pleasure, that ataraxia and aponia we talked about. But for Stoics, it was virtue.
Right, and that sets the stage for some pretty big differences, right?
It does, okay. So
Yeah.
their attitude towards the world, Epicureanism encouraged a kind of withdrawal from public life.
Yeah, they focused on creating this peaceful bubble, often with a close circle of friends. Keep things calm.
Whereas Stoics were all about being in the world, doing your duty, being a good citizen.
Right, active virtue in the face of all life throws at you.
And even their views on the gods were totally different.
Night and day, Epicurus with his indifferent gods and the Stoics seeing this divine order in everything.
And death, too. Epicurean, it's just, yeah, nothing to be afraid of. Stoics, it's about accepting death as part of the bigger plan.
Yeah, like two sides of the same coin, in a way.
So fascinating. They came from the same place, same time, but ended up with completely different conclusions.
It shows how diverse philosophical thought was, even back then. And while Stoicism might be more popular today, that focus on resilience, I think Epicurus offers a pretty compelling alternative path to happiness.
Makes you think, right, what a good life actually looks like.
Oh.
But I have to ask, how did this all play out in real life? I mean, the research mentions how Epicureanism influenced Roman culture, but wasn't it also kind of connected to hedonism?
That's a common misunderstanding. While it did spread to Rome and get popular, it's not that simple.
So all those images of Roman feasts and wild parties, not really what Epicurus was going for.
Not exactly. Remember, he was all about moderation and tranquility, not overindulgence. Roman hedonism was a whole other thing. Complex, lots of influences. And yeah, maybe Epicureanism played a small part, but it wasn't the whole story.
Fair enough. So besides maybe fueling some legendary parties, how else did it impact Rome?
Well, it definitely challenged their traditional views on religion and politics.
Ah, right. The whole indifferent gods thing. That must have ruffled some feathers.
You bet. It went against everything the Roman gods and power structures stood for. Appealed to people who were fed up with the status quo.
Wow. Philosophy taking on the establishment. That's pretty powerful.
It is. And it reminds us that philosophy isn't just abstract ideas. It can actually shape societies and cultures. Speaking of shaping things, it also had a big impact on how Romans viewed death.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. That idea of death just being the end, no sensation. Must have been comforting for a lot of people.
It was. Reduce that fear of the afterlife. It's something we still struggle with today, facing our own mortality.
We do. So Epicureanism, even back then, offered this framework for accepting death with a little more peace.
Exactly. Facing our finitude with a bit more calm. It's that focus on tranquility, that freedom from fear that makes Epicureanism so fascinating even all these centuries later.
I'm with you on that. Definitely thought-provoking stuff. But, okay, here's a question that's been bugging me. If it was gaining traction in Rome, how did it clash with Christianity? Those seem like completely opposite worldviews, don't they?
You're right, there was a clash. Early Christians really disliked Epicureanism. It all comes down to their views on God, the soul, the purpose of life. Completely different.
Let's break that down a bit. We've got Epicureans with their indifferent gods, and then you've got Christians with a personal God who's very much involved in our lives.
Yeah, huge difference right there. For Christians, God is the creator, the judge, the whole deal. For Epicureans, gods are just there, not interfering.
And what about the soul?
Another big difference. Epicureans, they believed the soul was made of atoms, like everything else. It dies with the body. Christians, they believe in an immortal soul, judgment, the whole afterlife thing.
Okay, so completely opposite views on God, the soul, and that leads to a different view on what life is all about, right?
Exactly. Epicureans, it's about finding tranquility and happiness now in this life. Christianity, it's about faith, virtue, and what happens after we die.
No wonder they clashed. So different at their core.
Exactly. For early Christians, Epicureanism was materialistic, immoral, went against everything they believed in.
But even with all those differences, was there any common ground between them?
Actually, yeah. Both of them rejected excessive materialism, that pursuit of wealth and status for its own sake.
Huh. That is surprising.
Yeah.
So different motivations, different goals, but they both saw the danger in putting too much emphasis on stuff.
They did. Goes to show how complex these philosophical and religious systems are. Sometimes even opposing worldviews can find common ground in the most unexpected places.
It's a good reminder to keep an open mind. But I'm curious, how did these ideas show up in art and literature? I know the research mentions how Epicureanism influenced Roman art, but what does that even mean?
So if you're looking at Roman art and literature, and you see a lot of nature, beauty, friendship, and this acceptance of death, there's a good chance Epicureanism is at play.
Interesting. So instead of the usual, epic stories of gods and heroes, we might see something simpler, more everyday life, human connection, appreciating the little things.
Exactly. And this sense of calm, accepting whatever happens. Imagine those serene landscapes, scenes of people just enjoying a simple meal, poems about nature. That's the vibe.
So different from that grandeur and drama we often associate with Roman art.
It is a counterpoint to all the conquest and glory. More focus on inner peace, quiet contemplation.
Makes sense. So if I stumble upon a sculpture of friends having a picnic or a poem praising a garden, I might be seeing Epicureanism in action.
You got it. Understanding the philosophy behind it adds this whole other layer of meaning.
It's like a secret code for understanding art. Okay, but here's something I've been wondering. If Epicureanism was so influential in Roman times, what happened to it? We don't see people starting Epicurean societies today, do we?
Well, it kind of faded away, especially during the Middle Ages when Christianity became the big force in Europe. The church, as we talked about, was not a fan.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as the church condemned it and other ways of thinking became popular, Epicureanism just went out of style.
Pretty much. Lots of Epicurus's writings were lost, destroyed even, and his ideas were seen as heretical.
Like, it went underground for a while.
Huh.
But our sources say it was rediscovered during the Renaissance.
It was. During the Renaissance, there was this big revival of interest in classical learning, so they found Epicurus again. And his ideas about pleasure, happiness, freedom from fear, they resonated with Renaissance thinkers.
Epicurus making a comeback centuries later. That's wild. But get this. Some scholars think Epicurean ideas might have actually influenced medieval thought, even though the church rejected it. How is that even possible?
It's a puzzle, isn't it? Like, how do ideas survive when they're being actively suppressed?
Yeah, it's almost like a conspiracy theory, but in the world of philosophy.
Right. But even though overt expressions of Epicureanism were forbidden, some scholars say certain core ideas may have seeped into medieval thinking through indirect channels.
Okay, how does that even work? What kind of indirect channels are we talking about here?
Well, think about it. Ideas have a way of getting around, even when people try to stop them. Medieval scholars, even the ones who were devout Christians, might have stumbled across bits and pieces of Epicurean thought in old texts.
Maybe they were misattributed or reinterpreted to fit the Christian worldview. It's like a game of telephone with ideas getting passed down and changed along the way.
Exactly. And even though the church condemned it officially, some of those Epicurean concepts, they just resonated with certain thinkers. You know, thinkers who were wrestling with questions about reality, happiness, what it means to live a good life.
So it's like a secret underground movement of ideas. Fascinating. But what specific Epicurean ideas might have slipped into medieval thought?
Well, one area that scholars point to is the idea of nature. Remember, Epicurus loved the atomic theory that everything is made of these tiny particles.
Yeah, but didn't the church have its own ideas about creation and nature?
They did, but some medieval thinkers, especially the ones into natural philosophy, they might have found the atomic theory pretty intriguing.
So maybe they tried to reconcile it with their Christian beliefs, like adapting it to fit their worldview.
That's the idea. Not direct influence, but more like ideas seeping in through the cracks. And it wasn't just about nature either. Some scholars also see traces of Epicurean ethics in medieval thought.
Now that's where I get really confused. How could a philosophy that's all about pleasure and tranquility get a foothold in a world where Christianity was pushing asceticism and virtue?
Good point. But remember, Epicurean ethics wasn't just about indulging yourself. It was also about moderation, self-control, finding happiness in the simple things.
So maybe the emphasis on pleasure wasn't so popular, but the idea of living a balanced, content life, that could have appealed to some medieval thinkers.
Exactly. Especially those who were struggling with the whole worldly desires versus spiritual aspirations thing.
So it's like this hidden thread of Epicurean thought running through medieval intellectual life, even if it wasn't always acknowledged. Pretty cool.
It is. But I think we'll have to pause here for now.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already. From the basics of Epicureanism to its impact on Rome, and even this potential secret influence on medieval thought.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So we'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into this world of Epicureanism. We'll explore its legacy, how it might be relevant even today. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our Epicurean adventure. I'm still thinking about that idea of Epicureanism secretly influencing medieval thought. Like, how did those ideas survive when the church was so against them?
It is a mystery, isn't it? And speaking of mysteries, our sources say there's another piece to this puzzle: skepticism.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Skepticism. Tell me more. How does that fit in?
Well, Epicureanism, it encouraged people to use reason to observe the world, and that led to a healthy dose of skepticism, questioning those traditional beliefs and authority figures.
So even though Epicureanism was rejected, it kind of planted those seeds of doubt. Like maybe those seeds sprouted in unexpected places.
That's the idea. Those medieval thinkers, even the devout ones, they weren't afraid to question what they were told, to look for different explanations.
And maybe those echoes of Epicurean skepticism, they emboldened them to challenge those old interpretations, to dig deeper.
Exactly. It's like an idea can have this ripple effect, its impact goes way beyond its immediate circle.
So even when it was gone, Epicureanism might have still shaped the way people thought in the Middle Ages. That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. Intellectual history, it's not a straight line, it's more like a tangled web.
Yeah.
Even ideas that seem forgotten can come back and influence future generations.
Makes you wonder what other lost ideas are out there, shaping our world in ways we don't even realize. But let's jump ahead to the Renaissance. Our sources say Epicureanism had a revival during that time. It's like those lost ideas have a way of finding their way back, don't they?
They do. The Renaissance was a turning point. People rediscovered those classical texts, and suddenly, Epicurus was back in the spotlight.
Like, he got a second chance to shine, centuries later. But what was it about the Renaissance that made Epicureanism relevant again?
Well, think about what was happening back then. Huge changes, intellectually and culturally. People were questioning authority, exploring new ideas, celebrating human potential. It was a perfect time for Epicurus to make a comeback.
Like those Renaissance thinkers stumbled upon his work and it was like, whoa, this guy gets it.
Right. His ideas about reason, pleasure, living a fulfilling life. They resonated with those Renaissance folks who were rethinking the relationship between humanity and the world.
So it was less about religion, more about individual experience, living in harmony with nature.
Exactly. It fit right in with the spirit of the Renaissance. Inquiry, self-discovery.
Wait, didn't the church still have a problem with Epicurus? They were pretty powerful during the Renaissance too, weren't they?
They were, but things were shifting. Humanism was on the rise, more emphasis on reason. People were more willing to challenge the church, to consider different ideas.
So the intellectual landscape was changing, more room for different perspectives.
That's it. And in that environment, Epicureanism found a new audience, people eager to hear what it had to say about the good life.
Shows how important context is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The same idea can be rejected in one era and embraced in another. Okay, but let's fast forward to today. What about Epicureanism's legacy in the modern world? Is it just an interesting historical footnote, or does it still have something to offer us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is yes, it does have something to offer us. Maybe not everything, but there are parts of Epicurus's philosophy that are surprisingly relevant to how we live today.
Okay, I'm all ears. What can this ancient philosophy teach us about navigating the modern world? It's a very different world from ancient Greece, that's for sure.
Well, think about his emphasis on tranquility. We're living in this crazy, fast-paced, always connected world. It's so easy to get stressed out, to feel overwhelmed. That Epicurean idea of ataraxia, finding that inner peace, it's more important now than ever.
It's true. Like a counter movement to all the hustle and bustle. We're all trying to find some peace in the middle of all this craziness.
Right. And Epicurus, he reminds us to manage those desires, to be content with the simple things. It's an antidote to all the consumerism, that constant pressure to buy more stuff.
It's a reminder that happiness doesn't come from having the most toys or from what other people think of us. It comes from within.
Exactly. Appreciating the present moment, finding joy in the simple things.
So even if we don't agree with everything Epicurus said, those insights into happiness, contentment, living a meaningful life, they're still valuable today.
Absolutely. They offer some timeless wisdom that can help us navigate this crazy modern world.
It's making me rethink my own priorities, that's for sure. But what about his views on death? Those were pretty radical back then. Do they still hold up today?
That's a tricky one. For some people, especially those with strong religious beliefs, the Epicurean view of death might be hard to accept.
Yeah, I can see that. But for others, those who are afraid of dying or struggling to come to terms with their own mortality, maybe Epicurus offers a different way of thinking about it.
I think so. That idea that death is just the end, no pain, no judgment. It can be liberating for some people.
It takes away the fear of the unknown. Let's just focus on living fully right now.
Exactly. We can choose how we think about death, how we face our own finitude.
And even if we don't fully agree with him, that focus on living without fear, pursuing knowledge, building meaningful relationships, those are lessons we can all learn from.
Definitely. It's what makes Epicureanism so fascinating even thousands of years later.
So after all this, it's clear that Epicureanism is more than just some dusty old philosophy. It's got these insights that still resonate with us today, things to think about as we try to figure out what it means to live a good life.
It really does. It's a rich, complex philosophy.
It is. We've learned about happiness, pleasure, death, the big questions. And it's amazing how these ideas from so long ago can still speak to us today.
They really can. It's been great exploring them with you.
And with you, dear listener. But before we wrap up this Epicurean extravaganza, there's one more thing we should talk about.
Ooh, a bonus round. I'm game. What is it?
Community. Our sources say Epicurus really emphasized friendship, surrounding yourself with people who share your values. He believed that true happiness, it thrives in that kind of supportive, intellectually stimulating environment.
It makes sense, doesn't it? We're social creatures. We need connection. It's not just about individual happiness. It's about sharing that journey with others.
It's like he's saying, yeah, work on yourself, find your inner peace, but don't forget to connect with others, build those meaningful relationships.
And it's especially relevant today, you know. We're so connected digitally, but so many people feel isolated, lonely.
It's true. That Epicurean reminder about the importance of community, it's like an antidote to all that loneliness.
It is. It's a call to put down the phone, to get together with people face to face, to build those real-life connections that nourish our souls.
It's about remembering that we're not meant to go through life alone. But wait, there's more. Epicurus wasn't just talking about hanging out and having fun. He believed that we learn and grow best through dialogue, through debating ideas with others.
Right, like a philosophical book club where friends come together not just to socialize, but to challenge each other, to expand their understanding of the world.
I love that image. It's about sharing the journey of learning and discovery, recognizing that knowledge grows when we share it with others.
Exactly. And you know what? We're kind of doing that right now, aren't we? Having this conversation, exploring these ideas together.
We are. It's like we're embodying the Epicurean ideal of community learning right here, right now.
And speaking of learning, haven't we got one more part to this Epicurean adventure? I'm not sure if my brain can handle it, but I'm definitely ready for more.
Don't worry, the final part of our deep dive will be just as engaging and thought-provoking as the first two. We'll be uncovering some fascinating connections between Epicureanism and other philosophical and scientific ideas, and we'll explore the enduring legacy of this ancient school of thought. Okay, buckle up, dear listener. We're about to take one final plunge into the depths of Epicurean wisdom. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And we're back for the grand finale of our Epicurean exploration. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? From those core ideas to how they played out in history, and even those hidden influences we talked about.
It really has. And you know, it's interesting how Epicureanism, even though it's often seen as this simple, pleasure-focused philosophy, actually touches on some pretty deep concepts.
Yeah, it's definitely more complex than I first thought. So for this final part, what kind of unexpected connections are we going to uncover? I'm ready for some more mind-blowing revelations.
Well, we could start with a familiar friend, atomism.
Atoms. The building blocks of the universe, according to Epicurus.
Exactly. Remember how he got that idea from Democritus? That everything, even our souls, are made of these tiny particles?
Yep. It's hard to forget after all that.
Yeah.
But I thought atomism was, well, an ancient idea. What's the connection to today's world?
Here's the thing. That ancient concept, it basically vanished for centuries. Then, boom. Modern science rediscovers it, and it revolutionizes our understanding of the universe.
So Epicurus was ahead of his time. Even without all the fancy technology we have today, he was on the right track.
It's incredible, isn't it? It shows the power of observation, of human curiosity, trying to figure out how things work. And that link between ancient atomism and modern science, it's not just a fun fact.
I was just thinking that. Okay, so how does this ancient idea about atoms actually affect us today?
Think about it. Our whole understanding of physics, chemistry, even biology, it's built on that atomic theory. How matter behaves, how elements interact, how life itself functions at the most basic level. It's all because of atoms.
Wow. So Epicurus, the philosopher of pleasure, is indirectly connected to modern science. That's quite a legacy.
It is. It shows how knowledge from different fields, even ones that seem totally separate, can connect and influence each other across time. It's like we're all part of this giant conversation spanning centuries.
Makes you wonder what other hidden connections are out there, just waiting to be discovered. Okay, so we've got atomism. What other surprises are in store? Who else is joining our Epicurean party?
Let's welcome a guest that might seem a bit out of place. Evolutionary theory.
Wait, what? Evolutionary theory. How on earth does that connect to Epicureanism?
It might seem like a stretch, but trust me on this one. Remember how Epicurus saw the world? Everything material, pleasure, and pain as these driving forces for humans?
Right. Avoid pain, seek pleasure. The basics of Epicureanism.
Well, those ideas, they kind of foreshadow evolutionary theory. Think about it. Evolution says behaviors that help us survive and reproduce, they tend to feel good, pleasurable. The stuff that's dangerous, it usually causes pain.
So it's like our biology is wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that drives our evolution. Kind of a survival of the fittest through pleasure.
You got it. Epicurus wasn't thinking about genes or natural selection, but his insights about human motivation, they line up surprisingly well with evolutionary theory.
So even across thousands of years, And with completely different ways of explaining the world, we see these connections between ancient philosophy and modern science.
We do. It shows how human thought, it builds on itself, evolves. Even when the language and the way we frame things are totally different, there's this underlying continuity.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But let's talk about Epicureanism's legacy beyond science. What about its impact on how we think about ethics, living a good life? What parts of it still speak to us today?
Even if we don't agree with every single thing Epicurus said, those core values, seeking happiness, valuing friendship, living in harmony with nature, they're still incredibly relevant today, like timeless wisdom.
It's like they're echoing across the centuries, reminding us what really matters. But okay, how do we actually apply those ancient ideas to our lives today? The world is a very different place.
That's the key question, isn't it? Take Epicurus's idea of tranquility. In our world, where everything's so fast and loud and we're constantly being pulled in different directions, finding that inner peace, that's harder than ever, but also more important than ever.
Absolutely. It's like we need a counter strategy to all the noise and distraction.
And Epicureanism gives us that. It reminds us to stop chasing after all the stuff, the external validation, and just focus on finding contentment in the moment, appreciating what we have.
Yeah, it's about simplifying things, right? Shifting our focus from what we're lacking to what we already have. Easier said than done in our culture, though.
For sure. But it's about making that conscious choice, to slow down, unplug, reconnect with the things that truly bring joy.
It's like creating a little pocket of peace in the middle of all the chaos. But remember, Epicurus wasn't all about just retreating into ourselves.
Right. He also placed a huge emphasis on friendship, on community.
That's right. True happiness, it's not a solo mission. We need those connections with other people.
Exactly. Especially today, when technology can make us feel so isolated, even when we're surrounded by people online.
It's like a reminder that we're meant to share life with others, to support each other, to celebrate together.
And don't forget, Epicurus believed that learning and growing, it's best done in community too.
Ah, right. That image of the philosophical book club, debating ideas with friends.
Exactly. We learn from each other, challenge each other, expand our understanding of the world together.
And you know what? That's exactly what we've been doing throughout this entire deep dive.
You're right. It's like we've been living out those Epicurean ideals, exploring these ideas together, sharing our perspectives. It's been a true pleasure.
It really has. And to you, dear listener, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of Epicureanism. We've covered so much ground, from ancient atoms to modern-day anxieties, from the pursuit of pleasure to the importance of community. We hope you've learned something new, maybe even challenged some of your own assumptions about what it means to live a good life. And as we wrap up this final part, we'll leave you with this. Even though Epicurus lived over 2,000 years ago, his ideas still have the power to spark our curiosity, inspire us, and maybe even guide us on our own path toward a more fulfilling and meaningful existence. Thanks for listening.